Greetings, everyone. I want to share with you some of my thoughts on the balance of the Force, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and try to clear out what I think are some misnomers about it. Now, balance of the Force, I don't think it means a versus scale of one side or the other, and where they have to equal out, so to speak. Because you can't pick and choose from being in the light and the dark and say that the ends justifies the means, or it's just how you use the power, it's your intentionality of it. In the Jedi Academy video game, where you're training to get your Force powers, and Kyle Katarn is, he's up there on the ledge and he's saying, no power is inherently good or evil, it's how you use it. Things like that. That doesn't really fly because certain things are only activated by anger and hatred and fear. Certain dark side Force powers to do that, and certain light side Force powers are only achieved with peace and calm and sort of a placidness. And so that kind of definition really doesn't fly. Now, besides that, if you do subscribe to that mode of thought of, say, I can be a little good here, a little bad here, and it'll balance itself out, or to say that it's not about light side or dark side, those are just sort of made up names, by some person who's trying to have some sort of control or codify the whole sort of thing. The kind of gray Jedi idea of there is no light, there is no dark, there's only the Force. The danger with that is because it can lead into a moral relativity, which basically means that everybody decides for themselves what's right and wrong. And what is right for me might not be what somebody else thinks is right. It's basically saying nobody is wrong. Nobody has to be wrong about something. Everybody can be right on that. Now, of course, moral relativity has its problems that way. Because let's say, for instance, in our country, committing murder is a crime because we recognize the harm in murder. We recognize the hurt and destruction that it causes in people and families. And so and the laws of a nation are reflective of the values of its culture. And so if we say that that murder is wrong, it's because we recognize it's evil. But perhaps in some other place, if you get away with murder and nobody catches you, they say, hey, good for you. You got away with it. Free of charge, free of punishment. And in their society, they may say, if you get away with murder, good for you. And so moral relativity, as you can see, doesn't work because there's no standard. Morality has to be set by a standard. And so that whole picking and choosing of light and dark, or just saying that that light or dark doesn't even exist, it just doesn't fly. It doesn't really work in the real world, nor does it and fiction is based upon real world. Now, as far as light and dark, some people think that the balance of light and dark is that the dark is always fighting and the light is always resisting, and that there's always this contest between the two of them. You can see why people would say that, because the Jedi are always saying we must destroy the Sith because the Sith are disrupting the balance of the Force. And, the dark side seeks to corrupt and overtake and not coexist. So that's more understandable of the balance of the Force being the tension in there. And you kind of almost get that idea of in the Mortis trilogy, where Anakin is being tested if he's the chosen one, if he can control the light and control the dark. But I think it's a little bit different than that. I'll try to remember to get to that point a little later. But I don't really think that the balance of the Force is about the tension that's happening in there. I mean, in some cases, yes, Luke describes that it is the tension and stuff like that, but it's the cycles of energies that go through in life, and I'll explain more of what that is. But the idea of fighting the darkness is what compelled the Jedi to participate in the Clone Wars was to stop the Sith. Destroy the Sith we must is what Yoda says. But there's a reason why, and it's not just simply because there must always be a conflict. The Force is not in balance because there is a conflict of light and dark. That's what I'm trying to get at. That's not really what balance of the Force is referring to, and I'll explain why. And so, to that sense, it's also not simply balance of good and evil, because evil is bad and everyone knows it. I've already discussed why we understand the effects of evil and we realize that it's bad for us. Nobody wants evil. Even evil people think that what they're doing is for their own good in a sort of sick and twisted sort of way. But see, good edifies, good builds up, it bolsters, it strengthens, it enriches. But evil always tears down, it always destroys, it always deceives, it always tricks. And there's always a selfish motive in evil, but good is always about serving, it's always about giving. Evil always wants more, and it's never satisfied. But good knows the value of patience and temperance and charity. And so the idea of balance of the Force is that the balance of good and evil, again, I don't think that's really what it's getting at. That struggle is always there, but that's not what balance of the Force is. Now, also there's this misnomer of if the light is stronger, then the shadow is deeper. That just doesn't even make any sense, really, because light dispels darkness. That's what it does. If this light up here were brighter, then there would be no shadow here. The light would reflect off of every surface, and if the intensity were bright enough, it would just shine and it would encompass the room, and there would be no shadow. So, to say that the darkness gets stronger when the light gets stronger, that doesn't even follow science, really. So that whole sort of notion just really doesn't work. So what is balance of the Force? To me, it seems that the balance of the Force is really referring to the balance of nature in the world, in the Star Wars universe, in the Star Wars galaxy. Now, let's look at some examples of things and how that's working. Take, for instance, when Rey and Luke are, when Luke is helping Rey to understand the Force and open up to it on Ahch-To. And, Luke says, "What do you see?" And Rey, opening herself up to the Force, she sees everything around her. She sees the island. She sees life. She sees death. She sees warmth and cold, and all of these different things that make up the world around them, the natural occurrences of what are happening. Death that feeds into new life, okay? Regeneration, rebirth. And between it all is balance. Okay? Sorry. Just balance, natural balance. And so life cycles in nature reinforce each other, like ecosystems. They integrate together, and it's like purposefully designed symbionts, like bees and flowers, life forms working together for mutual advantage, right? Bees drink the nectar from flowers, and they go home and they make honey. And bees, as they're moving around, they pollinate the flowers because they get the pollen where it needs to go, so that way a new seed can grow, a new plant can grow. And so these two completely different life forms are working together for mutual advantage. And so that's a sort of it's a nature effect. It's just part of an ecosystem. That's why the bees are so important. Now, so that just shows that nature, when it's undisturbed, works in a balance in and of itself, and life thrives in that way. Now, also consider, do you ever watch National Treasure 2? Because there's that one spot where they all fall onto this platform, not all, but some of them fall onto this platform. It's like this circular platform that's on this sort of spire, this jutting up spire, and below them, of course, is, the pit of death with just tons of spikes and just death. And so there's this platform here that's hanging on this, and they're all there. And if one person tries to move towards the center or towards the edge or whatever, it starts to tip one way, or it could tip a different direction, or that way, or that way. In any of these different directions, depending, as long as they're not in balance, it will capsize in one way or another. And really, the dark side is kind of like that. The balance of the force is that way because if something is interrupting it at any point, then the balance is tipped. If someone is forcing the equilibrium to not be maintained, then it becomes unbalanced. Now, Darth Maul, when he was brought to his senses with the help of Savage Opress and Mother Talzin, the Night Witches, he realized that the force is unbalanced. He could sense it, he could feel it. And Savage says it's because there's war, the Clone Wars. And Maul says, oh, so it started without me. And the force is unbalanced because, well, I'll kind of talk about why that is in a little bit more depth. But because of the war and all of the death and destruction that's happening, it's causing the force to not be in balance. Like being on shaky waters, being on a boat in shaky waters, it's unbalanced and it's tippy. So in the Mortis arc, you find that the planet shifts from light to dark. And the theme that you see is when it's during the light, the daylight, everything is blossoming and it's alive and it's fruitful and it's got vitality. But then when it becomes dark, everything just dies. It wilts. It fades away and just withers. But it's always coming back and forth like that. And so it kind of points to the idea of how the balance of light and dark really is, that the balance of the force is really more about life and death, but natural life and death, because Yoda says death is a natural part of life. Rejoice for those who transform into the force. Mourn them, do not. Miss them, do not. And then he, of course, goes on to explain how attachment can be a problem of the Jedi that can lead to the dark side, greed, fear of loss, right? And that's why the Jedi Order had maintained that you have to be sort of unemotionally detached for your safety and for the safety of everyone else, so that way they don't become victim to your force-induced whims, or to your force-powered whims, if you will. So death is a natural part of life. Now, fictionally, yes, it is. I don't think that death is actually the way that the world was designed, at least not human death, not sentient human death, but that's another topic. So, balance of force is not just balance of light side versus dark side. It's not about balance of conflict or saying that the dark side has to behave itself and the light side has to just not over-assert itself. No, I don't believe that really works. And I don't believe any of the Jedi actually did either, but it just feels like it's never been properly articulated as to what it is. And so I think that the balance of force is really just the balance of nature in the world, because natural life and death is the true nature of the force, of the light side, just the way that things are meant to be, because the force is made of life, right? So the Jedi, who embody the light side of the force, not exclusively, of course, but in general, the Jedi Order, light-siders, the Jedi are selfless. Their primary concern is to the service of others. So Jedi seek to find the will of the Force and to join with its overall design. Now, the Force is created by life. Obi-Wan says, the Force is what gives a Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together. And Yoda says, life creates it, makes it grow. It's energy.
surrounds us and binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter.
And so life, the Force is created by life. And the Jedi is to be protective and restorative, yet not intrusive. See, what's interesting is there's a deleted scene in The Last Jedi where there's something I don't remember. I haven't seen that bit in a while. It's a deleted scene about where Rey goes off and runs to try to come to the rescue of the caretakers or whatever, and she just leaves Luke behind and off she goes, and then she finds out that there's this party or something going on and that there's no big deal, and she's really ticked off at Luke for letting her having gone off and done that, and Luke just kind of cracks him and says, "You just ran off so fast." Is like the only time that Luke laughed in the whole movie, and you know it's in the deleted scenes. So, but anyway, it's the idea that a Jedi should not be intrusive either. Also, Qui-Gon says that we cannot use our he says we cannot use our power to help her in trying to convince the Gungans to participate in the liberation of Naboo. He said, you know, we can't force them to do this, even though it would be for their own good. We can't force them to do that. You know, it's almost like the Prime Directive in Star Trek. I grew up with both, so this isn't sacrilege to talk Star Trek in a Star Wars movie or Star Wars bit. The Prime Directive says to not interfere with the natural evolution or progress of a civilization, right? Just let them figure it out on their own. Let them own it up to it themselves. Don't help them out, because they found that every time that a civilization was helped out from above, the consequences were disastrous. Usually because the civilization wasn't ready for such advancement. They weren't ready for it. They hadn't matured yet to be able to handle technology and the powers of it, you know, stuff like that, you know. So the Jedi is to be protective of life, restorative to life. That's why protectors of truth and justice in the galaxy, right? And yet not intrusive. Letting life go as it does, right? Even if it's something that we don't necessarily agree with, like how brush fires are actually a kind of a good thing in the forest, and animals aren't really scared of it because it's a natural thing. If the brush is protected and the fires are always put out, then when the fire actually really comes, it blazes so uncontrollably that it's impossible to burn out, and it really causes a problem. But if people had just stopped meddling with it and just let the smaller brush fires happen, then it would have burned it away, and it would have died out, and it would have been fine, and life would have gone on as it does. But interference causes problems. Now, by serving life, a Jedi serves the Force. And so it's self-beneficial for a Jedi to be a servant, because if you serve life, you serve the Force is strengthened, and then the Jedi has a deeper connection to the Force. So it's self-beneficial for a Jedi to be a servant. Now, when a life passes away, it transforms into and joins with the cosmic force. And so the balance of life and death, sentient or non-sentient, preserves the balance in the Force. So to this end, the Force grants foresight to those pure in heart to see it, like Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon Jinn, I think, is one of the most brilliant Jedi ever. And I wrote an old Zanga post, Zanga, back, you know, when it actually worked. I wrote a big, long whole thing about Qui-Gon and how I thought he was the most brilliant Jedi ever. And I don't remember what it said on that, but I still believe it. Now, the thing that makes him so good is that he saw value in whom others deemed worthless or pathetic life forms, right? Such as Qui-Gon and Anakin. He saw the value in them, not just to say, hey, this Gungan can help us get to these other people, but, you know, just his internal value as well. And Anakin, of course, he saw his internal value. He just didn't see him as a simple slave boy, but he recognized the Force within him when others would have simply passed him on and said, oh, well, he's too old, right? So it's not worth it. It's just, too late. Sorry. But Qui-Gon didn't give up on people. He was sort of their champion, and he always sought to bring out the best potential in people. Now, that's not to say that the rest of the Jedi were uncompassionate, but the Council on the whole were tuned to the unifying force, the grand scheme of things in the galaxy, while Qui-Gon, he found great meaning in the living force, the here and now, the individual, because the big picture is made up of the individual. So it's almost like people who devote lots of time and energy to helping people in small cases, and others may say, you're fighting a losing cause, you're fighting a losing battle, you're never going to be able to heal all these people or help all these people, so why do you do it if the task is so great and it's so unaccomplishable? Wouldn't your focus be better, wouldn't your efforts be better focused somewhere else? And the person who's doing the healing for the one person's will reply to them and say, I made life better for that person. I made life better for that person, and that person, and that person. And because their life is better, I am fulfilled and happy. But it's not just about self-interest of satisfaction, self-satisfaction. But it's saying that by helping them, they are now equipped to go help others. It's like a grassroots movement. It starts small, but it goes big. So that's what made Qui-Gon, one of the things that made Qui-Gon so great is because of his compassion. And again, not to say that the Jedi Council were uncompassionate, but their focus was on a grander scale. Now, one of the quotes of Qui-Gon's, and I don't remember which book it's from. I don't know if it's from the Phantom Menace novelization or if it's from the Revenge of the Sith novelization. I think it might be Phantom Menace. So a Qui-Gon Jinn quote here. He says, "There are secrets hidden in the Force that are not easily discovered. The Force is vast and pervasive, and all living things are a part of it. It is not always apparent what their purpose is, however. Sometimes that purpose must be first sensed in order that may be revealed later." So that's a quote from Qui-Gon Jinn saying that you have to invest in things in order to find its true potential. So, but again, not obtrusively, but in a serving sense. So that is really where the balance of force happens, is because by building up the force, by building up life, it preserves the natural order of things, and it builds it up to be what it was better than what had been harming it from before, which would be from the dark side, the harming. Now, a really great quote is from Legends. Corran Horn said in the Legend book I, Jedi, he said, "Perhaps it is not for me to sculpt the Force's flow to my purposes, but for me to be sculpted into that which more easily works with the Force." There is just so much packed into that right there, just so much theological implications of that. But essentially, that is a Jedi understanding their place in the galaxy. It kind of comes back full circle to what I first said. A Jedi seeks to find the will of the Force and join with its overall design. Now, the complete opposite of that this is what causes disruption in the Force. This is what causes a disturbance in the Force. Every time there's a disturbance in the Force, it's because of the dark side. It's because of great death, or it's because of some malicious force, or some darkly moving movement of the Force. The dark side is, rather than natural life and death, it is forced death and forced life. Oppression on life, or compulsion in life. taking freedom out of life, so to speak. So forced life and death. It is a corruption of the Force. So the Sith, by contrast here, the Sith are selfish. They are narcissistic, which basically means that they believe they're the most important thing. They believe that they are God. They seek to control circumstances through brutality, coercion, trickery, or sorcery. They twist the Force to suit the user's wants and fears, almost always at the expense of others. It causes unnatural occurrences which are unsustainable, leading to pain, suffering, and untimely death. The dark side often shows a desired future rather than an accurate future. So darkness is really the absence of light. Much like cold is the absence of heat. There is no actual thing as cold. It's simply not having heat. Cold is just a word that we use to describe it. Now, what causes darkness? Well, a substance interfering with a ray of light, right? A shadow, something that casts a shadow. Or it could be the light fading over a distance. A single candle can light up a room, but a moon can eclipse the sun. The dark side clouded the vision of the Jedi on a galactic scale like fog, tiny particles which together can hinder light. Ultimately, the dark side is suicidal. By oppressing and destroying life before its time, the Force is unbalanced and the Force is weakened. Rather than a symbiont, the dark side is like a parasite. It consumes its host, and it consumes those who are using it. Those who think they can master the dark are deceived, because truly they are slaves to the dark. It's the darkness that masters them. So how did the Jedi lose? Well, it's important to understand that the Jedi gradually lost their shine in the Force by the machinations of the Sith. By becoming great warriors, the whispers of the Force became harder to hear, and truth and justice were harder to discern. They were not able to be true to their nature, as their light faded, it became hard for them to see.
The dark side clouds everything. Impossible to see. The future is.
Your arrogance belinds you, Master Yoda. See, the Jedi became arrogant and too sure of themselves, and they didn't accept soon enough that the Sith and the dark side were real threats who had evolved since the days of the rule of two. The Sith, through politics, rather than through brute force, through politics and trickery, they painted the Jedi, who most of the galaxy had never seen in person, and they only knew as vague figures. The Sith painted the Jedi as sorcerous villains who were hypocrites against their code and only used their moral high ground to press their certain point of view with the galaxy, right? To sort of force their beliefs on everybody else. That's how the Sith painted the Jedi, to villainize them, right? But the thing is, light cannot create darkness. Evil does not come from good, because light cannot create darkness. Only that which casts a shadow can. The combination of the Jedi's arrogance, which is a darkness, and the Sith's treachery, which is another darkness, that was the eventual fall of the Jedi Order. But the Force can react and balance itself. See, Rey is the obvious example. Darkness rises and light to meet it. The Force awoke in Rey, pure of heart, to be a sort of Arthurian salvation figure who took up Excalibur to stand against the First Order. Now, Anakin is the result of Plagueis and Sidious's midichlorian meddling. The Force reacted and created Anakin to basically be the combative force against that. See, the Force chose Anakin to defeat the line of Sith Lords, and it could be argued that the Jedi Purge, the Dark Times, the Galactic Civil War were a necessary revolution that the Force ultimately used to cleanse the blood of the Jedi. That could be argued. It allowed the Jedi to return more to a pure, unattached status that they were before the Phantom Menace. Sometime before the Phantom Menace. The Force works in mysterious ways. But in any way, the Force chose Anakin to defeat the Sith Lords. to bring balance to the Force. Now, in the same bit, Luke was used to help Anakin come to his senses and restore him. So Luke was also kind of a balancing figure against what Vader had done in the galaxy. But Luke demonstrates both sides in the whole effect, in the whole bit of dark and light. Because see, Luke was impatient and reckless and impulsive. He brought weapons to the cave trial and proved he was his own worst enemy. He attempted to take down Vader on Bespin and lost. He nearly murdered Vader in patricidal rage and only stopped when Palpatine offered him the job as his new apprentice. He drew his weapon against Ben to strike him down out of survival instinct. And in Legends, he apprenticed himself to the resurrected Emperor, foolish enough to think that he could use the dark side to beat the dark side. And each of these aggressive acts caused pain or death. So Luke isn't always this neat, squeaky clean character that we believe him to be. Luke makes big mistakes. He really does. He is impulsive. But as much as Luke has dark tendencies in him, when he's in his right mind and he allows himself to surrender to the Force rather than try to take control of the situation, he is hopeful, he is calm, and he's compassionate. He's always ready to help. He's optimistic. He believed in the good still in Vader, and he chose to surrender to Vader and appeal with unconditional love. He threw down his weapon and refused to join the dark side. And he used Force projection rather than actually fight Kylo Ren to be a legendary figure in the galaxy and buy an escape for the Resistance. And he surrendered himself to the Force. He let go. And so the Force has its own way of balancing itself out, right? So in conclusion, the light side, I believe, is the true nature of the Force, despite the tempting claims of the dark side to convince you otherwise. True power is not achieved through dominion or oppression, but rather by compassion and love. People's true potential is only realized when they are exposed to the truth and found in the light, when they are exposed to the truth found in the light, and they accept it and they surrender to it. Even though the darkness interrupts the light, in the end, the Force finds a way to restore the balance of nature so that it will thrive in perpetuity. So I hope that all makes sense to you. So to summarize, the balance of the Force isn't about the fight between good and evil, or the struggle of light side and dark side, or the coexistence of light and dark side, but really the balance of the Force is when there is no dark side, when there is no hatred, when there is no oppression or dominion or malevolence in the galaxy, because then life goes on the way that it's supposed to be, and all is at peace in the galaxy. So that's why I believe the dark side really isn't a good, legitimate use of the Force, because it is destructive and it is ultimately suicidal to the Force to use the dark side. But the light side is the true nature of the Force, which binds the galaxy together. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions, please comment on it. Leave your thoughts and impressions. And as always, may the Force be with you.